Frank Herbert published his final entry in the Dune series, Chapterhouse Dune, in 1985. For a long while, that would be the last chance fans would have to explore the complex, compelling universe he had created. After Lynch's Dune flopped in 1984 and Herbert passed away in 1986, the Dune property appears to have entered a dormant phase. Interest in any further film adaptations rapidly dried up, and the book series seemed to have reached its premature conclusion. The first efforts to resurrect Dune in the popular imagination came in the early 90s, and it actually wasn't as a film, it was as a video game. Martin Alper, game designer, founder of Mastertronic, later president of Virgin Interactive, and a fan of Herbert's work, started trying to secure the rights in the late 80s. In the process, he discovered that some confusion had developed over who exactly controlled those rights, a situation set to become a running theme in all subsequent attempts to adapt Herbert's book. Technically, Dino De Laurentiis still owned an active option on the series, but in the wake of his film's failure and the bankruptcy of his company, that may have no longer been the case. The rights apparently hadn't simply reverted back to Herbert because of his passing, and the distributor of the film, Universal Pictures, was maintaining an interest in the property as well. After a few years of minor legal negotiations, the rights appeared to have wound up in the hands of Universal. Alper was finally able to license the property and begin development on his game in 1990. But much like the film adaptations, this game ran into its own share of complicated production troubles. It was temporarily cancelled, which led to another company beginning development on an entirely different Dune game, only for the first game to be finished by yet another company. Both games, which are apparently unrelated to one another, were completed at nearly the same time in 1992 and published by Virgin Games as Dune and Dune 2. The games were both commercially successful, today remembered fondly by PC gaming aficionados, in particular Dune 2, which is seen as a key work in the development of the real-time strategy genre. These games may have helped prove that interest in the series was still strong, perhaps paving the way for a new producer to come in and start work on a fresh filmed adaptation. This time, the producer was one Richard P. Rubinstein. Richard Rubinstein got his start in television. He worked his way up from the bottom as a production assistant to become an associate producer in charge of his own shows. In the early 70s, he was producing a sports documentary series called The Winners when he met and hired an intrepid young director named George Romero, who would inspire him to take his career into the world of film. Romero was already a legend, thanks to his pioneering horror film Night of the Living Dead. But even legends have bills to pay and budgets to raise. Romero was still having to make his way as a working filmmaker. Rubinstein, a savvy businessman, must have recognized Romero's talent, because together they formed Laurel Entertainment, the production company that would allow Romero to make his next 5 films, including iconic sequel, Dawn of the Dead. By the mid-80s, Romero and Rubinstein were realizing their ambitions were on divergent paths. Romero wanted to continue making films, and Rubinstein saw more commercial potential in television. Romero left the company, but the parting was amicable, and the two remained friends. Rubinstein started producing a string of TV shows: Tales from the Dark Side, Monsters, and Stephen King's Golden Years. More often than not, these shows were cult hits, earning Rubinstein a respectable amount of success. His many projects with prolific and ubiquitous horror author Stephen King often turned out to be the most profitable. Rubinstein's association with King went back to his days with George Romero. He had been a producer on Creepshow, and for years had tried to help Romero mount productions of The Stand and Pet Sematary. They didn't happen while Romero was with the company, but in 1989, Pet Sematary was brought to the screen by director Mary Lambert. The Stand proved trickier. It was probably the success of the miniseries adaptation of another of King's more unwieldy novels, It, that inspired the decision to realize The Stand within that same format. Television was rapidly expanding in the 90s, taking its first steps towards producing its own blockbusters that seriously competed with movies in terms of budget, production value, and cultural influence. When The Stand was a huge success, Rubinstein recognized the opportunity presented by the miniseries format. It allowed filmmakers to reach viewers in their own homes. It gave space for tackling more complex narratives. And now, it was even starting to give access to the kinds of tools needed for producing Hollywood-style material on the small screen. For books famously difficult to adapt to the screen, like The Stand, it was perfect. And there was soon another famously difficult book he set his sights on. Rubinstein acquired the rights to the entire series of Dune novels in 1996. From the sounds of it, he ran into his own difficulties with the legal issues around the books. According to Rubinstein, in an interview dated December 2000, De Laurentiis apparently still controlled the theatrical rights somehow, but not the television rights. Unlike Martin Alper, who licensed the game rights from Universal, Rubinstein was able to simply buy the television rights directly from the Herbert estate. Production didn't get off the ground right away. Dune was going to be a far more technically challenging endeavor than your average miniseries, requiring a large number of sets, costumes, and special effects to bring its elaborate world to life. Even with digital and CGI effects becoming more prevalent in the decade after Lynch's Dune, which made the realization of such a world far more feasible, the technology was still largely in its infancy, working to overcome its own barriers and limitations. Add to that the lingering memories of the 1984 film's box office failure, and that meant Rubinstein wouldn't get the series greenlit for another 3 years. He finally found a friendly home for the project at the Sci-Fi Channel. This would be one of the network's first moves into producing its own high-profile shows and miniseries, a road that would soon lead them to their acclaimed Stargate and Battlestar Galactica reboots, a trend that has recently given way to a more tongue-in-cheek approach, epitomized by the bafflingly successful Sharknado film franchise. Dune officially entered production in 1999, the same year Frank Herbert's son, Brian, and co-author Kevin J. Anderson resurrected the book series. Dune House Atreides, the first in a long-running series of Dune prequels and expanded universe stories, was created from notes left over from Frank Herbert's massive amount of work on the original novels, and it helped mark the beginning of Dune's return to prominence. The miniseries and the new books were likely going to introduce Herbert's creation to whole new generations of fans. Rubinstein hired an old acquaintance, John Harrison, to write and direct the series. Harrison's career is an interesting and eclectic one. After spending some time as a touring musician, he entered the world of film production when he joined up with Romero and Rubinstein at Laurel. Among many other jobs, he was an extra in Dawn of the Dead, an assistant on Knight Riders, first AD on Creepshow, composer on Day of the Dead, and eventually, he moved into writing and directing on shows like Tales from the Dark Side and Monsters. He continued working on screenplays and directing, mostly for television, throughout the 90s, occasionally tackling a feature assignment, like Tales from the Dark Side the movie, and even co-writing the screenplay for Disney's Dinosaur, before stepping aboard to helm Dune. He was a longtime fan of Herbert's work, familiar not just with the first book, but with Herbert's entire series, and so able to explore in his adaptation expanded story and character elements that weren't established until the later novels. For a property that has had such a long, intricate history of production troubles, the making of the Dune miniseries seems to have been astonishingly problem-free, though certainly not without its own challenges. The budget, large for a television production at $20 million, was only a small fraction of what similar theatrical features were then costing. In fact, this was only half the budget of the previous Dune film, made over 15 years earlier. Production took place largely in the Czech Republic to save on costs, and many international character actors, such as Giancarlo Giannini, Uwe Ochsenknecht, Miroslav Taborski, Ian McNeice, as well as Oscar winner William Hurt filled out the cast, with newcomer Alec Newman playing Paul Atreides. The 3-part, 4.5-hour miniseries premiered on the Sci-Fi Channel in December of 2000 and earned what remain some of the highest ratings in the network's history. In 2002, the complete director's cut was released on DVD, expanding the runtime to just under 5 hours. Like Lynch's film, this is an interesting adaptation, containing its own strengths and weaknesses. Harrison strove to capture the full sweep of Herbert's story as faithfully as possible, and he largely succeeds. It's not as visually sumptuous as the Lynch film, but that can be forgiven, considering its format and background. Despite budgetary restrictions, Frank Herbert's Dune, as it is known under its full title, was a breakthrough in more ambitious television production. Harrison makes the most of his resources, and the enormous sets, complicated CGI effects work, which won the series an Emmy, and striking expressionist lighting from the great Italian cinematographer Vittorio Storaro are all impressive. What I find to be the series' biggest weakness is its curious lack of deeper dramatic weight. Say what you will about the Lynch film, one of its greatest strengths was its rich atmosphere, something the miniseries doesn't have. I was never certain exactly why this was until I read a few interviews with Harrison, where he talked about his process adapting the book. One of his key decisions was to incorporate much of the novel's frequent internal dialogue into the actual spoken dialogue. This is in contrast to Lynch's decision in his film to include this material as voiceover, a technique Harrison felt was dramatically ineffective. He may have a point there, but while Harrison succeeded in giving the story a much more lucid presentation, I think that by making so much of the story's subtext text, it also unfortunately undermined an essential layer of its fascination. Part of the reason Herbert's novel is so absorbing is how well he balances strategic spoken dialogue with constant subterfuge. Characters are always plotting, always calculating just beneath the surface, questioning who they can trust, who they may effectively betray, and why. The fact that so much of that storytelling is kept carefully hidden inside the characters' minds gives them a depth, and the plot a level of tension and intrigue that is fairly unique in a sci-fi story. When the characters are just stating all those things out loud, it loses some of that power. I respect Harrison's creative choice to do this, and I understand its necessity, but for me, it doesn't quite work. Still, the series was successful enough for the Sci-Fi Channel to immediately order a follow-up. Harrison again wrote the script, this time adapting both the second and third books in the series, Dune Messiah and Children of Dune. Apparently busy with another series at the time, he handed directing duties over to Greg Yaitanes. Frank Herbert's Children of Dune premiered in March 2003, again to high ratings and another Emmy for special effects. Despite having 3 more books to potentially adapt, the network, for some reason, never made another series. Perhaps this was because, according to Harrison's own conception of the story, in covering the first 3 books, they had essentially told the whole story of the main Atreides saga. Dune's fruitful life on television had come to a close, but a new path back into the world of film was about to open up. Rumors began to circulate in 2007 that a major new film adaptation, the first since Dino De Laurentiis, was being pursued by Paramount Pictures. The studio had found recent success adapting classic sci-fi properties like Transformers and Star Trek into big-budget action blockbusters. Dune was allegedly being considered as the next project to receive this kind of treatment. In 2008, the rumors were made official. Paramount announced plans for an all-new Dune feature film adaptation. The real engine behind the deal seems to have been Kevin Misher, producer of action films like The Scorpion King and The Interpreter, and he would produce alongside Richard Rubinstein, who had apparently become the principal manager of Dune's screen rights. De Laurentiis' option on the property appears to have finally expired by this time. Misher already had a director in mind, Peter Berg. Berg had started his career in the late 80s as an actor, but after finding only limited success in this field, he started transitioning into directing in the late 90s. By the mid-2000s, he was earning some critical praise with dramas like Friday Night Lights, and establishing himself as a gifted action director on films like The Kingdom and The Rundown, the latter made for producer Kevin Misher. An extremely large production started coming together, with a projected budget well over $100 million. Authors Kevin J. Anderson and Brian Herbert were brought aboard as technical advisors. Artist Mark Simpson, known professionally as Jock, began creating some striking concept art, which he later posted on his website. Robert Pattinson, still known mainly as the breakout star of Twilight, was rumored to be the frontrunner to star as Paul Atreides. Josh Zedemer, a relatively new screenwriter who had recently sold a spec script called Villain and done rewrites on the latest James Bond film, Quantum of Solace, would write the script. Berg shared a few early details in interviews around this time, indicating the direction he was planning on taking his adaptation. They paint only a vague picture, but he did make it clear that his interpretation would be very different from Lynch's and Harrison's. From the sounds of it, Berg's Dune was indeed envisioned as a more action-driven affair, conscious of delivering on general, audience-pleasing expectations. He tended to use terms like muscular and adventurous, saying he felt there was a more dynamic movie to be made from the book. In general, his comments didn't instill a lot of confidence in anyone who was a serious fan of the book. I'm of the opinion that it'd be improper to form any solid conclusions, positive or negative, based on these scant few details. Since this version was never made, we can't fairly assess any of Berg's creative decisions. Dune may not feel like a totally natural fit for an action-adventure movie, but we don't actually know if Berg would have compromised the story had he taken it in that direction. As it turned out, we never got to find out how well a more action-driven Dune might have worked. By 2009, after almost 2 years of development, and the huge budget reportedly causing a nervous studio to repeatedly postpone giving a firm green light, Berg dropped out of the production to direct another, far less beloved sci-fi blockbuster, Battleship, released in 2012. To his credit, Berg allegedly directed the film only to finance a more personal project called Lone Survivor, which launched a lucrative creative partnership with actor Mark Wahlberg that has so far resulted in 5 consecutive films. The Dune production team set about finding a replacement director, a more complicated task than it sounds. Any choice had to essentially travel through 3 separate levels of approval: the producers, Kevin Misher and Richard Rubinstein, the studio, Paramount, and finally the owners of the copyright on the original novel, the Frank Herbert estate. Several interesting candidates were considered, including Neil Blomkamp and Neil Marshall, before French cinematographer turned director Pierre Morel was announced as the final choice in early 2010. Like Berg, Morel was well established as an action director. His 2008 thriller, Taken, scripted and produced by Luc Besson, had been a surprise mega-hit that soon spawned its own franchise, and his directorial debut, District 13, one of the first films to prominently showcase parkour, had fluently blended amazingly agile set pieces with additional notes of levity and sly political commentary. Morel also stated, in his interviews around this time, that his take on Dune would be, as he put it, faster and more modern, likely indicating a higher emphasis on action. But unlike Berg, Morel had the advantage of being a long-time Dune fanatic, and his comments discussing the production do seem to convincingly back this up. He was intimately familiar with the source material, and appeared to be taking the challenge of properly adapting it to the screen very seriously. When asked about the script put together by his predecessors, Berg and Zedemeyer, while he was careful to remain diplomatic, Morel admitted that it wasn't his approach, and he would be starting from scratch. He wanted to create a script as faithful as possible to Herbert's original book, and in a way, confront the ambivalent shadow still being cast by David Lynch's adaptation. Another writer was hired, Chase Palmer, an up-and-coming writer-director with some acclaimed short films to his name, later a co-writer on It, and a new screenplay was put together. Reportedly, Palmer's script was pretty damn good. The production seemed back on track, until later in 2010, when it was announced, somewhat abruptly, that Morel had left the project. Aside from minor discussions about whether or not the film would be shot in 3D, the latest technological craze being widely embraced in the wake of Avatar's record-breaking success, no other solid details appear to have ever emerged about the production. With Paramount's option on the Dune property set to expire in 2011, another director needed to be hired quickly if they were going to salvage the past 4 years of development and script costs. Frustrations were mounting at the film showing so few signs of making discernible progress at the studio, so, following negotiations with the producers, the option was allowed to quietly expire, and Dune was cancelled. Rubinstein, now the primary rights owner once again, said the production troubles and cancellation simply came down to ongoing cost concerns. After the cancellation, Rubinstein floated the idea of pursuing a new film himself. He liked the script Palmer and Morel had written, and said he would probably reapproach the two if he could get financing together. But considering the projected budget was still in excess of $100 million, and using the Palmer script meant recouping Paramount for their development costs, nothing ever appeared to develop out of those plans. Dune endured yet another Hollywood death. Fortunately, Dune has never stayed dead for long. In 2016, the rumors started up again. Legendary Pictures had entered into negotiations to acquire all film and television rights for the franchise. The always complicated and confusing copyright status on the property appeared to have, yet again, undergone a few changes in the intervening years. In the initial reports of the deal, former option holder Richard Rubinstein is not mentioned at all. Instead, the deal appears to have been largely carried out by attorneys on behalf of a long list of names and controlling interests. There were producers Thomas Tull, Mary Parent, and Cale Boyder on the studio side, and Brian Herbert and Frank's grandchildren, Byron Merritt, and Kim Herbert on the Herbert estate side, which was now being administrated by their company, Herbert Properties LLC. Copyright just continues to grow more Byzantine as time goes on. The deal was finalized in November, and another production was announced. If this one was somehow going to manage to avoid the fate of the last one, Legendary was going to have to work hard to find the right director. Dune, as always, was a project of intimidating size, sprawling story, complex themes, loads of characters, and a very detailed world. The technical challenges and financial demands of making a movie this big were only increasing. Modern blockbusters may have opened up limitless possibilities for visuals and special effects, but conversely, the inflated budgets and increased risks involved with these mammoth modern productions have made it more and more difficult to tell stories of real complexity and nuance. directors have to fight harder than ever to maintain creative control and preserve their freedom to take artistic chances and challenge audiences. The only way innovation is ever allowed to take place in art. The list of directors still wielding the level of power necessary to push the boundaries of the industry seems to diminish every year, probably why so much of today's innovation is happening outside that world, in television and streaming. Nonetheless, by December 2016, Legendary Pictures had hit upon a very promising directorial candidate, French-Canadian auteur Denis Villeneuve. Villeneuve had rocketed to prominence over the last few years, with several high-profile and brilliant genre hits, but his career actually extends further back than most people seem to realize. He had been working in the Canadian film industry for over a decade, and was already a 4-time winner of the Canadian equivalent of the Oscar, the Canadian Screen Award for Best Director, by the time he exploded onto the Hollywood scene with relentlessly intense thrillers like Prisoners and Sicario, in 2013 and 2015, respectively. His first movie, August 32nd on Earth, an intimate drama, had been released in 1998, and his more surrealist sophomore effort, Maelstrom, had come just 2 years later, in 2000. Both films established him as an eccentric rising star in the world of Canadian film. His next film, Polytechnique, didn't come until 2009, but the controversy it sparked, due to its focus on the horrific École Polytechnique massacre, drew much attention. This devastating, starkly beautiful black and white film, recreating events that resulted in the deaths of 14 women to a lone gunman in 1989, was a deft handling of extremely delicate subject matter. Villeneuve took on an equally devastating story the following year, with the Oscar-nominated Incendie, covering war atrocities in the Middle East and the unspeakable trauma endured by an Arab woman and her children. These mature, precise, and intensely compassionate works successfully avoided the exploitative pitfalls of filming such painful, real-life stories, and were indicative of the uncommon level of command Villeneuve had over his abilities. 2013 was probably the crucial year in Villeneuve's journey from regional virtuoso to Hollywood luminary. He released 2 movies, Prisoners and Enemy. One, a brutal mystery following the violent breakdown of a father who recklessly takes the law into his own hands after the disappearance of his 2 young daughters, and the other, a jolting, nightmarish descent into the psyche of a duplicitous man who accidentally discovers his own double. Both movies showed a further deepening of Villeneuve's mastery of his craft, building palpably thick layers of atmosphere and almost unbearable levels of tension, sometimes created seemingly out of thin air. This astonishing skill set he had developed would start attracting the attention of American studios, and miraculously, it would translate across those industry barriers fully intact. His next film, Sicario, tackling the vicious world of drug cartels and the equally vicious government agents tasked with battling them, was an uncompromising marriage of Villeneuve's cinematic talents with his sophistication at handling very tough contemporary themes and concerns. The very next year, he was making his first sci-fi film, Arrival, an intimate, emotionally vast masterpiece about extraterrestrial contact. Villeneuve was on a roll, and in 2017, the same year he was confirmed as the director of Dune, he took on the comparatively daunting challenge of resurrecting the world of Ridley Scott's iconic Blade Runner in a long-rumored, big-budget sequel that somehow managed to match the brilliance of the original. The film was a bit of a box office disappointment, but still one of the best sci-fi epics to come along in quite a few years. Admittedly, this whole journey feels like it's pointing right towards Dune. Villeneuve was confirmed as the latest director to take on the challenge in February 2017, and he had even mentioned the book a few times as a dream project of his in the months leading up to the deal at Legendary, so his hiring does indeed read as a rather auspicious sign. Even so, that didn't make the sheer size of the endeavor any less of an obstacle. Villeneuve spent 2 solid years preparing his production. Work on the screenplay didn't even begin until halfway through that preparation in early 2018, after the decision was made to split the workload into 2 parts. Villeneuve would tackle the book as 2 separate movies to avoid sacrificing any of the intricacies of the world he was painstakingly bringing to life, and has spent this current production focusing on just the first half of the story. Eric Roth, the Oscar-winning screenwriter of Forrest Gump, was the first to come aboard, later joined by John Spates, a sci-fi veteran of projects like Prometheus, Doctor Strange, and Passengers, a script he had written in 2007 that didn't get produced until 2016. The 2 certainly make for an unusual pairing, but the specific strengths that each could bring may make for an especially strong synthesis, especially considering the particular demands of a story like Dune's. Filming finally took place in early 2019 and wrapped approximately 5 months later. Despite the exhausting amount of time it took to get there, Villeneuve's efforts appeared to be progressing remarkably more smoothly than any previous adaptation, made or unmade, perhaps with the exception of the miniseries. Fortune was actually smiling on a Dune production for the first time in decades, and everything was on track for a November 2020 release date, before the setbacks eventually hit. The pandemic shutdowns caused theaters all over the world to shut their doors, and in response, nearly every tentpole release of 2020 has been either postponed or premiered on a streaming platform. At first, Dune was only delayed to December. Then, almost last minute, it was postponed again to late 2021. There may be a silver lining to this, since Villeneuve had previously voiced concerns that post-production might have to be rushed to meet the December release, owing to the slower pace he was being forced to adopt by working remotely with his editor. Still, even with the delays, this is far from the disaster it could have been. The movie is all but finished, and the marketing material that has been released so far looks great, though previous Dune directors David Lynch and Alejandro Jodorowsky have had some less than supportive things to say about it. Miniseries director John Harrison is more optimistic, and is even listed among the production's many executive producers, alongside producer Richard Rubinstein, even though he admits that he is not directly involved with the film. Rubinstein's level of involvement remains unknown. Villeneuve, for his part, seems resolutely determined to deliver an awe-inspiring spectacle that maintains a strict fidelity to the source material, for which he appears to possess, like Pierre Morel, a genuine reverence. I'm glad to see, though, that he isn't afraid to shrewdly update that source material a little bit. Early reports of the film say that this version has beefed up the roles for the actresses and worked to contemporize aspects of the story's political and social commentary. The casting has assembled a stellar ensemble that also brings some much-needed diversity, and Villeneuve has apparently tried to push the antagonist, Baron Harkonnen, away from the harmful, degenerate gay villain stereotypes he had previously fallen into, problems only exacerbated in the Lynch film by the choice to make him diseased. I have to admit, I'm very excited for Villeneuve's Dune. He has described it as essentially the movie he has dreamed about making since first reading the book as a young boy. It's hard not to feel the allure of sentiments like that, and he appears to have been given the necessary space to make that movie, apparently very much as he envisioned. The fact that something like that is still possible in this modern industry is a little stunning. All the more reason I'm so excited to see it. While there's of course no guarantee that the film will live up to the already immense expectations building up around it, I have to say, with Villeneuve's impeccable track record and his extraordinary command of film craft, it's difficult to avoid the temptation to say that he really does seem like the one born to to tell this story on screen. Whether or not that's true remains to be seen. I look forward to finding out. Thank you all for taking this journey through Dune's history with me, and for sticking it out this long. This may conclude the Dune saga for now, but clearly we will be making some return trips in the future. Shai-Hulud willing, I'll be there with you in the theater the day Villeneuve's Dune finally opens. And let's not forget that even when the new film comes out, Villeneuve's enterprise will be far from over. It is still only the first half of the total undertaking. So that means providing the first film is a hit, and actually does manage to deliver on our expectations, Villeneuve will have to rally his energies right back up and deliver all over again on the second part. Not to mention the additional commitments he's made to the expanded franchise, like directing the pilot episode for the prequel television series Dune: The Sisterhood for HBO Max. This is an incredibly demanding venture he's embarked upon, and I hope Villeneuve is as ready to meet it as he appears to be. Ideally, this latest chapter in the Dune saga is only beginning.